Alright, so I want to talk about bone health. And before you turn off, I know what you're probably thinking, because I thought it too. When my eating disorder was a lot worse, people would talk to me about bone health. Doctors, clinicians, treatment people would say to me, do you know what you're doing to your bones? You need to recover because you're damaging your bones. But honestly, I didn't care. I really didn't care. And I think that makes sense because when you have an eating disorder, you're not exactly taking care of yourself, are you? When you're living with an active eating disorder, you're starving yourself or purging or doing some kind of behaviours that aren't in your best interest and don't serve your body or your health. So why would you also care about your bone health? And the other thing is, thinking about my bone health was always thinking about the future, and I could never think about I would never think that far into the future with my eating disorder around, because I always had to focus on what I was doing today, eating a certain number of calories today, not going over that limit. What was I going to eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner? When wasn't I going to eat? How would I make sure that I could avoid this social gathering and not eat too much fat but get enough protein and blah 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 blah. There was no time for thinking about bone health when I'm 70 because I had so much to think about today. By the time I'd had my eating disorder for a while and then recovered a bit, then dipped into a really bad relapse, I was so miserable that I didn't want to be alive till I was 70. There's a statistic that people talk about in the eating disorder community or in treatment, that 1 in 5 people with eating disorders die, or something to that effect, which is awful. But for me, when I was suffering and struggling with my eating disorder, that statistic did not scare me, because dying would have been preferable to living each day with anorexia. It was like living in hell every day. I was trapped in my mind and I felt guilty all the time. I felt anxious. I felt awful all the time, worried about what I was going to have to eat, worried about what I'd just eaten, worried about exercising. Oh, it was awful. But no one ever said to me the reverse way of phrasing that statistic, which is that 4 out of 5 people with eating disorders live, and actually you have a higher chance of living either after recovering from your eating disorder or continuing to live with your eating disorder until old age, which means that you are going to notice effects on your bones. I should probably put this whole spiel in some context. So I listened to a podcast the other day. Actually, I'm only halfway through, but it was a podcast with Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani, who I think is great, and she was talking about bone health and how between the ages of 10 and around 22, you are building your bone density for the rest of your life. That is the critical period of building your bone density, and if you're not receiving enough nutrition or nourishment within that period, then your bones are really going to suffer. And she noted she's seeing people in their 20s with kyphosis, which is like sort of like a curved back, like a hunchback, because essentially their spines were not strong enough, which is really scary. And so if you don't eat enough during your adolescent years, you put yourself at risk for fractures, osteoporosis, stress fractures that never heal, so you can never exercise ever. which for some people with eating disorders, like me in the past, would have been a nightmare. This applies to people, males and females. A lot of the time people focus on the impact on bone density for females with amenorrhea and periods and all that, but it affects males too. And the other thing, if you're like me and you don't have an eating disorder, or you nourish yourself sufficiently during adolescence, but then your eating disorder gets worse in your 20s, then you can rapidly lose bone density and put yourself at risk again later on in life for fractures and kyphosis, etc. And I know that this is true because actually my dad works in bone density, ironic, so I had a bone density scan before my eating disorder resulted in more severe malnourishment, and my bone density was fine. And then after that more difficult period with my eating disorder, my bone density worsened significantly. So it is, in my case, what Dr. Gaudiani has said has proven to be true, and it's a bit scary. But what really interested me on the podcast was that the podcast host from the MEDA Association said bone health is something that should really motivate individuals with eating disorders to recover. And I totally agree with that. It should motivate individuals to recover, but does it? Because it definitely didn't motivate me. And I mean, when you're deep in your eating disorder and clinging to your life, of course you're not going to be thinking about your bone health 30 years down the line, right? But the fact is, you are most likely going to live for another 30 years, or live longer than perhaps you anticipate, because you're so miserable and you think, well, for me, I was so miserable I couldn't think of going for that long. But you can recover. If you're watching this, then you probably will recover. Bone health will eventually become something that you care about. And I know for me, listening to that podcast, I didn't feel annoyed with myself, because eating disorders are not a choice, and as I said, I just had so many other thoughts to deal with that bone health was not something I could comprehend at the time. But I certainly do feel sad that I have compromised my bone density due to struggling with an eating disorder, and now I can't go back in time, and I can't go back in time and increase my bone density. I can try my best now, but it's extremely difficult to increase your bone density after that critical period. I mean, I'm not sure what my point is here, because you probably don't really care about bone health, but for future you who is going to recover from this eating disorder, who is going to live a much more fulfilling life full of joy, ups and downs, struggles, but struggles that you can cope with without your eating disorder. When you reach 50, 60, 70, you're going to care about your bones. You're going to wish that you had recovered sooner, so that you didn't have a weak spine, weak ankles, so many injuries. So for future you who is going to recover, in order for future you to have the best recovered life possible, you should care about your bone health. And that means you should recover now. You should recover as soon as you can. There is never a good time to recover, really. It's no matter when you do it, it's hard. It's really, really hard. It's like, I was thinking about this other day, when you're with your eating disorder, it's like you're miserable everywhere. It's just grey, foggy, cloudy, awful. But peering into recovery is like looking into a dark tunnel. You don't know what it's going to be like going through recovery. You don't know what it's going to be like out on the other side of the tunnel. But the only way to see what's on the other side of the tunnel is to go through it. You finally get sick of living in this miserable place, and you step into the tunnel, and it is dark, it is scary, it is really challenging. It is more challenging than staying in that miserable place where you started. But you keep going and you keep going, and then finally you start to see the light at the end, and when you get there, it's not perfect, but it's way, way better than when you started. I'm no good at drawing, otherwise I would draw something to explain what I mean. I'm gonna end this video now because I should go and do some work. Will I do some work? I don't know. I've been having some technical issues today, and I feel like that's a sign to take a break from work, so I probably will do that. And yes, I have some random blue in my hair, because what else are you meant to do during lockdown? It's only just now that I realised I am like a lot of blue. My nails are blue, top is blue. I guess I like blue. That's all for now. I hope that you're keeping safe and well, and I'll record again soon. Lots of love. Bye.